Hi, I'm Olivia Williams. Today I'm presenting a webinar for Madison Housing Week 2025 called Beyond Individual Gain, Building Community Wealth Through Permanent Affordability. I am a CLT consultant and researcher and strategist based in Madison, Wisconsin. You can find me at oliviarenewilliams.com. I've been in this field about 11 years. I started with my PhD research on community land trusts and eventually found my way into leading a community land trust in Madison, Wisconsin, Madison area CLT. And I am now exiting that role and going to go full-time consulting and staying in the Madison area. So today's agenda, we'll talk about the problem and the tools, homeownership and the wealth gap, permanently affordable homeownership, permanently affordable rental, and some of the social benefits of permanent affordability before we get to the conclusions. So first we'll talk about some of the problem and the tools. So here we're showing the change in median home value in Dane County from the Wisconsin Realtors Association compared to median incomes in Dane County over time. So this is going back to the year 2000 up through this data went through 2022. That's the blue and the red lines were data from those times. And then we looked at the average of the growth, year to year growth in each of those data sets and found that the average uh, growth that a home had in value over time, the average home value went up 5.53% per year, where the average income growth, incomes went up an average of 2.85% per year. So we used those averages to project out from 2022 over the next 20 years how much that gap would grow. And you can see that median home values, if this growth continues at the same pace, will grow exponentially and the gap will continue to widen as home values reach over $1 million by 2040 and incomes continue to stagnate. So there's a great need, and a lot of this was defined in the Dane County Regional Housing Strategy in 2024, showing that 1 in 4 Dane County households are cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. So that means 44% of renters in Dane County are spending more than that 30% of their monthly income on housing. Almost half of Black and Latino households are rent burdened. 35% of seniors are cost burdened or rent burdened. And also 12% of households spend over 50% of their income on housing, which means they're severely cost burdened. So the regional housing strategy came up with some goals. They said that Dane County must produce 139 new housing units by 2040 or 7,000 homes per year to address the existing needs and keep up with growth because we're seeing population growth in our area. So of those homes that need to be produced, Dane County needs to create 35,000 new rental units that are affordable to 60% AMI and below by 2040, and at least 250 affordable single-family for-sale homes should be built new or acquired and rehabilitated annually based on these goals. So these are significant numbers of what needs to be produced. I might argue that they should produce some goals around permanent affordability as well as lower income ranges where there's a great need. But even as it is, these are ambitious goals. The city of Madison also has some goals around affordable housing. In 2021, the Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway released her Housing Forward Plan. She said, by using all of our financial and regulatory tools, we will work with partners to construct 1,250 new affordable housing units in the next 5 years, half of them for households earning less than 50% of the area median income. Those goals have been updated. There was a recent update this year to the Housing Forward Plan I'm linking here, which mentions land banking creative uses of tax increment financing. They also start using the term long-term affordable. So the goals have changed since 2021. The numbers have increased a bit. They say that the city of Madison has housing production targets to support the creation of 15,000 new homes by 2030, with at least a quarter of them having long-term affordability at below market rates. By that, they mean 30 to 40 years of affordability, and they usually mean for rental housing, reaching incomes of 60% AMI or below, and for home ownership, they're talking about 80% AMI or below. Now, they mentioned we'll use all of our regulatory and financial tools. I just want to briefly summarize what that means. We do have in Wisconsin, there are severe restrictions on what kind of regulatory tools we can use. We cannot do rent control. We can't require a certain number of affordable units in each development. That would be called inclusionary zoning. That's also preempted by the state. There's a lot of renter protections we can't implement here. We have done quite a bit of other things here in the Madison area specifically. We have downtown height incentives that allow developers to agree to a two-story bonus if at least half of the additional space for affordable housing is reserved for affordable housing and maintained affordable for at least 30 years. There's also a lot of zoning liberalization ordinances getting passed in the last few years that just increase density, kind of allowable density, allowable development. This is good. I'm in favor of this. It also does not produce affordable units by itself. It sometimes can require the demolition of naturally occurring affordable housing in order to create more density. So these regulatory tools that are available to us in Wisconsin may increase supply, and we may see median prices go down eventually over time, but they don't produce affordable housing, especially for the lowest incomes, and they don't get us out of the affordability crisis completely. So we do need financial tools, especially because we really need between 250,000 to 270,000 in subsidy per unit in order to reach even the 60% AMI category, especially for larger families. So that's a big chunk of money that's needed per unit, not to mention the amount that might be needed to reach even lower incomes. And we can find these subsidies in different ways. You can, get private subsidy from grants or donations. There are, also existing homes that are reaching those incomes even without subsidy because they might be called naturally occurring affordable housing, but they may not stay affordable long term. And then we have other grant programs, some of which are federal, like from HUD, the CDBG and home dollars. Our city and our county do distribute those dollars for affordable housing. They don't really meet the need that's there, but they are something a lot of programs are able to access. There's also tax credit programs, the federal low-income housing tax credits. Those are distributed through our state housing finance agency, WHEDA. Those are how most affordable rental housing gets produced. They can be matched at the local level as well. The state also has its own tax credit program that mimics the federal one. And then we have local funds like the Affordable Housing Fund that the city of Madison created, which was really created from property tax levy. So it comes from our taxes in order to produce more affordable homes. It can be used as development subsidy gap, the gap between what it costs to build a home versus what's affordable to someone is called that gap. That's where we need a subsidy. This fund is also used for down payment assistance to help people access home ownership. There are also other creative local financing options. In the city of Madison, we are starting to use more tax increment financing for land banking or other ways to support affordable projects. So that's a complicated one, but it is an area where there's more innovation happening. And then there is this other area of just bonds or local capital financing that I spoke about at last year's Housing Week a bit more in depth, but it is local governments have access to lower cost um, financing than a lot of private banks will give. So if there's lower interest rates and the city itself is taking out loans, it is a way to actually finance affordable housing um, more effectively, potentially, than with banks. Again, it is a complicated one. I think there's room to explore it more in our area. And then with all of these grant programs, there can be funding restrictions on these funds, carrots or requirements attached to funding, some of which could make these homes affordable in perpetuity. Currently in the city of Madison, the Affordable Housing Fund dollars um, only go to projects where they promise to keep the units affordable for 40 years at a minimum. And the city has a land use restriction agreement for those projects to make sure that those units stay affordable for that period. So now I'll go into home ownership and the wealth gap. It's well known in our society, in our country, that home ownership as an institution is one of the biggest reasons for the gap between white average wealth and Black and people of color's average wealth. It's the primary driver in the wealth gap. So the response to this in a lot of policy circles has been to just promote homeownership as an investment to build household wealth and to allow more people to access this tool. This isn't a new strategy. In 1995, President Clinton created the National Homeownership Strategy, which is very similar to some of the strategies implemented today. They did things to reduce construction cost, as well as targeting counseling, education, and down payment assistance to underserved households. This was really successful, and within 9 years, the US reached its peak homeownership rate in US history at 69.2%. Of course, right after that was the Great Recession and the foreclosure crisis. So between 2007 and 2009, 8% of Black and Latino homeowners lost their homes, 4.5% of white homeowners lost their homes, and the racial homeownership gap widened. So by 2019, the Black homeownership rate was back down to 1988 levels. This graphic came from an article from the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry, but it gets this point across. These bars show the different homeownership rates, change in homeownership rates for different racial groups. And the purple bar is all owners. The blue is the Black population. So that's the one I've circled. And you can see between 1988 and 2004, the Black homeownership rate went up. Then between 2004 and 2016, it went down more than the other groups. And it hasn't gone up very significantly since then. It hasn't really rebounded. Where the other racial groups, it really has rebounded more significantly. So this leads me to think that conventional homeownership as a tool for wealth building doesn't really work to reduce racial disparities in wealth. Homeownership efforts 20 years ago made Black households more vulnerable to impacts of the recession. Systemic racism has made homeownership retention actually more difficult for Black households due to factors like the lack of liquid assets for emergency funds, So if you start with less wealth and then you own a home, it's harder to have a rainy day fund when things do happen and you have to keep paying your mortgage. There's also, of course, predatory lending, which is still rampant. It affects people of color more than white families. And just in general, this racism, which can lead to job insecurity or other hardship, which again makes having a rainy day fund more important and also harder to have in the first place. So homeownership can be risky, looking at conventional homeownership. That retention piece is one of the most important things, really to focus on keeping homes in the black ownership in order to increase the benefits of homeownership. Black homeowners are more likely to go into foreclosure or otherwise exit homeownership back to the rental market than are white homeowners. And promoting conventional homeownership really hasn't proven to be an effective strategy for closing the racial wealth gap. Here's again another graphic of the wealth gap. So this is the gap between the wealth held by the average Black. This also shows Hispanic and white populations. The Black wealth gap in 1992 was 78%, and now it is 85%. So you can just see that that has grown over time. So now I'm going to talk about community land trust, which is really my specialty, and is often a strategy used for permanently affordable home ownership, though the CLT model can be used for rental and commercial space and community gardens and other kinds of uses as well. The way it works is the home buyer gets a mortgage for just the home. It's usually a subsidized home that the land trust is able to access through public sources, sometimes private sources, and we make that home affordable to the first buyer. And then that home buyer just owns the home, and the CLT owns the land, and there's a ground lease that keeps the home permanently affordable. And it the homeowner signs the ground lease, kind of knowing knowing that they're going to pay that benefit that they got of home ownership at an affordable price. They're going to pay it forward to the next homeowner, another low income buyer, and they're agreeing to sell their home at an affordable price to the next buyer. We do have monthly ground lease fees that help with our administrative costs and CLTs. Again, I worked at the Madison Area Community Land Trust, where monthly fees were between $50 to $75 a month. That's fairly typical for CLTs, but it can vary. Um, and community land trust homeowners do pay property taxes, though they are usually reduced rate from commercial or kind of regular property tax rates. And they must maintain the home as their primary residence. So these are just some fun stats about community land trust. There's been a lot of CLT research. I actually um, have been a CLT researcher and kind of continue in that space here and there a little bit. Um, so one study showed that across the country, 70 out of 100 CLT homeowners go on to buy a market rate home. Uh, Over 99.5% of CLT homeowners facing financial difficulty avoid foreclosure. And the foreclosure rate for CLT homeowners is much, much lower. It's a tenth the rate of conventional homeowners, even during that market downturn and the recession. And a lot of that's due to the affordable price of the mortgage, the fact that the CLT has to approve the mortgage, and most folks are getting kind of typical 30-year Fannie Freddie loans instead of anything predatory. Um, and the CLT is also here as a steward for the homes and the homeowner to offer post-purchase support and to be able to just help as much as we can if there is a financial challenge in a family. At Madison Area Community Land Trust, I have this additional statistic that um, we have multiplied our investment dollars almost by two, meaning that we have 64 homes in the land trust, and with those 64 homes, we have served 126 families. So that initial investment in those homes has the impact has multiplied 196% in just our program alone. This is another image showing that community land trust home ownership, we really see it as something on the spectrum of housing somewhere between rental housing and market rate home ownership. It's really great for families who have not been able to buy their own home, but may see that as something in their future. And it's also, it's just a really great way to have stable housing prices, but have some autonomy over the home as well. So it's something great if you've been renting and are looking for more of that stability and autonomy, but can't quite make it into the market rate home ownership. So the Madison Area Community Land Trust resale formula is detailed here on the screen. A lot of CLTs have different formulas. We kind of make those decisions locally, but the point is to keep the home affordable for our target income. At Madison Area Community Land Trust, we have the initial purchase price plus 1% simple interest per year. Of 1% of that initial purchase price is added per year, plus credit for improvements done on the home or qualified capital improvements. So you can see at the sample house on the right, this is the price of a home that sold this year, sold for $235,000. And so we add $2,350 per year plus credits for capital improvements. So you can see the years owned and the sale price at the bottom. We say it's the starting sale price because that doesn't include the credits of the capital improvements. So we try to account for the cost of remodels and improvements done to the home with a depreciation schedule attached. So we have a policy you can find on the MACLT website about that. That's also pretty typical for community land trusts across the country to have a qualified capital improvements policy to encourage people to take care of their homes. We also, CLTs on occasion may have to buy back their home if there is a need for maintenance and repair. And so that is something that's kind of built into this price as well, is that there are times when the CLT might have to buy back a home, rehab it, and resell it, and we want to be able to do that without additional subsidy. So that is also kind of modeled into this price. If you're trying to create home ownership outside of a CLT without permanent affordability, this is what a forgivable investment looks like without any affordability restrictions. You need some subsidy to fill the gap between what's needed to create an affordable home, basically the difference between the cost to build the home and what a homeowner can afford, and a low-income homeowner can afford. And that subsidy needed grows over time as that gap widens between incomes and home prices. And so without a resale restriction, a larger subsidy is needed for each subsequent buyer in order to keep the home affordable over time. Case in point is our first home at Madison Area Community Land Trust in 1993 had an affordable subsidy to fill that gap that was $16,000. And now our gap is more like $200,000 or more. So you can see that it's a greater kind of increase than inflation. It's more in line with that that growth in real estate prices I showed you at the beginning and how that gap continues to grow over time. So this really illustrates why it's helpful to have an investment early in permanent affordability, because it's just going to get worse, and that's what history has shown us. So with a permanently affordable home and a community land trust, there's increased impact per dollar invested over time. CLT homes stay affordable to low-income buyers over time with just one initial subsidy, meaning that the impact of that subsidy grows over time. And that's how MACLT has nearly doubled our impact with our investment dollars. Here's just one more example of that within the MACLT portfolio. This was a home that was developed in the land trust in 2005. And at that time, MACLT sold the home for $138,000. But the appraised value was $167,000. Then it resold again to a new low-income family in 2009. It didn't, at this time, we had an appraisal-based resale formula, so these are not using the 1% formula, but you can see how this home did not appreciate very much, and we were kind of in that recession by 2009. But a new family got in there, and were able to stay there a long time. And MACLT bought the home in 2022 back from that home seller. And CLTs do have right of first refusal on the home. And so we were able to buy this home back and redo the roof and flooring and still sell the home at 210 to a family below 60% AMI. So this initial $52,000 permanent investment from the city of Madison, that was federal dollars, CDBG dollars in 2005. This has now served 3 families living in this home. So here's an example of if we're bringing a home into the land trust right now, and we're trying to target a 60% AMI family. That example is on the right, where we would really need $254,000 in this example to bring that home into affordability, to reach a monthly cost for that family of $1,950 per month. And if we were doing that and we were just going to keep the home affordable for that first family, we would need the same amount of subsidy to reach the same income family. But in 15 years, our homes on average sell about every 15 years. So in 15 years, if it were just a one-time affordable home, you need a greater subsidy as that real estate price increases. I estimate you need about $475,000 in 15 years, where we don't need anything to keep that home affordable to the next family. Now, it does impact the individual wealth that first family is able to take home. If that home was just affordable one time, they might take home, in this example, over $530,000, significant for that wealth building component. But in the CLT home, they still bring home $86,000, where renters on average only take home about $100 a year is on average what renters save, according to some research studies on this. So the CLT model kind of balances the difference in order to make sure more people have access to both the individual wealth building opportunities and the stability and autonomy and all of the other good things that come with home ownership. If we look at this example over 40 years, and I chose 40 because that's how long the city of Madison requires affordability when they give out subsidies for home ownership or rental subsidies. If we look at that same 60% AMI, you need about the same subsidy for rental housing as you do for home ownership, just to bring unit costs down enough to meet the 60% AMI family. It's about the same, where the monthly cost is the same. But if you look at after 40 years, again, the CLT home resells with no more subsidy to keep the home permanently affordable. The one-time affordable home, if you assume that real estate prices are increasing at 5.53% per year, as they have over the last 20 years, you actually need $2.8 million 40 years from now to make that same home affordable. And same with the rental, if we assume the same subsidy is needed for rental as home ownership, you need $2.8 million in 40 years to be $254,000 today, just because of how fast real estate prices increase. Now, in this one-time affordable home, if someone owns it 40 years, they own it outright, they sell it, they will make almost $3 million, even if they got into that home kind of with like assistance, and they were low income to begin with. In the CLT home, after 40 years, they will take home uh, almost 540,000 in our model. The rental family, again, is just saving $100 a year. So their kind of wealth building opportunity is only 13,000. So this is an example of kind of it uses model assumptions and shows these kind of numbers over time. I created a spreadsheet where you can do this, and I'll share this with you all afterwards. Um, you can kind of download it. This is what it looks like on the right. There's a bunch of tabs. There's a lot of things you can plug in on the first page, but it really is to compare a community land trust homeownership model to just a one-time affordable homeownership model. And you can see that homeowners net equity, their take-home individual wealth building after their home sale, the subsidy needed in the beginning and after X number of years to keep that home affordable, just like I just showed you. And there's a lot of fun stuff in here you can play with. So I want to provide that so anyone can download it and play with it. One thing I'll say about permanently affordable home ownership is there are kind of a growing number of examples of different kinds of organizations using different types of legal documents like deed restriction, land use restriction agreements, and the like to kind of enforce permanent affordability. And I think that's great. And the community land trust model and movement has really been the kind of industry standard over the last several decades um, to kind of do this, to figure out how do we support homeowners long term, how do we support them in resales and refinances, what's the best kind of legal mechanism to do that. So the community land trust model is more tried and true than a lot of other kind of deed restriction models, which sometimes have not been enforced and actually get sold at market rate, even if the intention was to keep them permanently affordable. So having this organization in place whose really primary purpose is to make sure that the homes stay affordable, and that we're in touch with the families, we care about the homes, we keep track of them, has been a really essential thing in permanent affordable home ownership just over time. So we also we develop our own homes at Madison Area Community Land Trust, but we also can be a partner to developers in creating affordable home ownership, where we market the home, find eligible buyers, and then retain ownership of the land and support them with home ownership questions, home maintenance, and when they want to sell their home, kind of how does that work? So, and like I mentioned before, we can also, the community land trust has the right of first refusal. If that homeowner wants to sell, we can actually buy back the home if we want to, if it needs a new roof or other kinds of rehabilitation, keep that home in good condition. I'll get briefly into permanently affordable rental housing, which is less of my kind of specialization, though it is something I've done a bit of research and really think is also very important. Um, so most rental housing that is created in this country uses the low-income housing tax credits from the federal government. Um, in Madison, historically, um, those tax credit properties have been affordable 30 years. As I mentioned earlier, now there is a requirement that they have to be affordable for 40 years if they use any city funds with those with those tax credits. However, because this program has been around about 30 years, we're now losing affordable rental units right now as their time periods expire. And, you'll see whole buildings, turn over and get rehabbed into market rate buildings that used to be affordable. So it's a really big issue, this expiring tax credits thing. And I, I just think it's kind of a wake-up call to look at, well, how long are we requiring those units to stay affordable into the future? Because we could, either at the state level or the local level, make sure that those subsidies are impactful long into the future. So there has been kind of research on this as well. It can take a little bit more money upfront to have a longer term impact and reserve funds for rental housing, but it's not a huge amount. There was this study by the National Housing Conference showing that 50-year viability for buildings that were kind of meant to be 30 years affordable, almost half of them in the study actually could be viable for 50 years, and half needed only a marginal, like $6,000 per unit increase in their subsidy just to increase their affordability for 20 more years. There is also, in California, I believe there's 50-year affordability requirements across the state for tax credit properties. And there was research showing that that didn't really impact investor interest in participating in the program, which is kind of the big fear is like, well, developers will hate this or investors will hate this, so let's not, do it. But, there are actually a lot of states doing longer affordability periods that are finding that, their programs are still working. And even if there is a need to rehabilitate a property at a later date, in the CLT model, we figured out how to do that without additional subsidy, as I was talking about. I believe that's possible in rental, but even if additional subsidy might be needed later for the actual building, um, if the land is permanently affordable, you can start over without having to pay new land acquisition costs. So it saves on the rebuild later. And there's lots of examples beyond Wisconsin where long-term affordability is a requirement. So cities that require 99-year affordability restrictions on all new subsidized housing include Boulder, Cambridge, Davis. So Vermont, as a state, mandates permanent affordability for their state LIHTC projects. Chicago also has a tax credit allocation. They incentivize 99 years. Quite a few other states have minimums of at least 50 years. There's a kind of table and a map of these QAPs by the National Housing Trust looking at tax credit allocations. They found on average that US states require or incentivize 42 years of affordability. Wisconsin is still at the minimum, 30 years with an option to exit at 15 years. Madison has the 40-year affordability, and now they're calling that long term, where most publications, if you look at kind of definitions, will say that long term is actually 50 plus years. So I feel like there's a lot of room to grow here, and to increase that term here in Madison and Wisconsin. Just to plug here that last year I presented with a group on public financing and social housing and looking at how we can actually take out kind of the investor returns for market rate development and create more affordability at cost, doing at cost construction with lower interest loans through public sources. So this is just a plug to go look at that. I'm not going to get into it too deep, but there are ways to kind of create modest affordability even without subsidy for rental housing. So here we're showing some of the benefits of home ownership outside of individual wealth building. There's stable housing expenses, more stability to invest in health and family and education, things like that. We see better health outcomes when you have stable housing. Again, the reduction in foreclosure rate, um, post-purchase support through the land trust. There is intergenerational wealth and stability through kind of inheritance of housing or saving, knowing what your housing costs are and having them be lower than they would be, predictable, and paying off your mortgage does allow for more savings. So these are all kind of benefits of CLT homeownership. There's also this really important aspect of permanent affordability, thinking about place and investing in particular places and desirable neighborhoods. The thing I'm going to focus on here is transit-oriented development, and that's become pretty, important, especially in Madison, as we've had a whole bus redesign and bus rapid transit come into play. The city of Madison has emphasized uh, higher density developments along transit corridors as well as affordable development. The issue is if you don't have permanent affordability along transit corridors, you don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future with home prices or real estate and commercial prices in those areas where there's a lot of access and ability to use transit to get there or to get to a job and get to other resources. There's this interesting study recently I saw in Los Angeles, which, is an area where they've invested in more transit like we have here, but it's also still easy to use a car. They found that these new transit routes have attracted investment in real estate, and prices have gone up so much that wealthier residents are moving in closer to transit, using cars more often, and displacement is occurring, which not just affects commuters, but the transit system itself. So there's actually lower ridership than there was earlier because the real estate prices are going up so high and wealthier residents aren't using transit. So just another reason this permanent affordability right now in areas that are desirable and along transit corridors is really important. I wanted to touch on this equitable development report that came out in 2019 as well. Um, this this report kind of highlights some of these issues, so I wanted to show you a couple maps, even though they're a little older at this point. But I haven't seen many updated maps of people talking about this specific issue. So this was before the bus redesign, but it shows kind of transit access areas in the darker colors have the highest transit access, at least in 2019 in Madison. They also correlate to areas where there's accelerating and appreciated markets. This one shows home ownership, home values. The white areas actually are already they labeled as historically higher value, so they've kind of been high value for a long time. The dark blue shows areas that are already, at least by 2019, becoming kind of out of reach for median income families. And then the accelerating and the purple show kind of areas where there was and still is a pretty like reasonably priced homes that are quickly going up in value as more families are moving to them. So you can see that there's some kind of these areas where there's transit access, there's also increasing or already high prices. And this is the rental market map, which shows also, kind of similar patterns. Some of the difference is that there's areas where there's a lot of rental housing and less home ownership. That's some of the difference between the maps. But these areas with a lot of transit access are most at risk for gentrification, displacement, rising property values that may reduce kind of accessibility. On this map, combine some of these ideas to show the kind of blue and purple are um, kind of already too expensive for a lot of lower and middle income families, and the pink and orange are um, sort of at risk and accelerating. The pinkish is like accelerating um, in price. And this is, of course, our new transit system, which also goes to a lot of those same areas where there's risk of appreciating real estate prices. So it's just something to consider in thinking about where are we investing and how long will that investment be there? Because even if we're even if it's a subsidy that will get repaid to the city, where will it be invested next time becomes the question. So it's one of the important aspects of permanent affordability. And this equitable development report actually named this issue of stabilizing neighborhoods to retain residents and businesses, and talked about community land trusts as a strategy there. Similarly, the South Madison plan talked about similar issues, based on this data and information, talked about the need for anti-displacement strategies and community wealth building in South Madison, and also named community land trusts in the strategy. They use this term community wealth building, which was popularized by the Democracy Collaborative, kind of a think tank that promotes CLTs among other models, but they really talk about community wealth building as a sort of transformative way of thinking about economic development that's not just about extracting, investors investing in real estate and extracting wealth from communities, but instead allowing communities to have direct ownership and control of their assets, and keeping those assets available to median and low income people. So again, getting close to the end here. This permanent affordability is so important to that neighborhood stability and strengthening and generational impact in place to create kind of rooted families, reducing displacement, keeping neighborhoods culturally, stable. So this is something that, again, I'm very passionate about. I've been thinking about a long time. I wrote an article in 2021 called Madison Must Commit to Permanently Affordable Housing. And I'm presenting a lot of those same arguments here, that it's an efficient use of public funds to create an investment that stays with the land forever, to create generations of place-based impact, to stabilize neighborhoods, especially near transit, to create not just a present supply of affordable housing, but also a future supply of affordable housing, because this crisis isn't going away. So how do we make this happen? Requiring or further incentivizing 99-year land use restriction agreements with funding, community land trust partnerships, kind of either requiring or incentivizing those in RFPs, because we've figured out how to kind of multiply our impact by partnering with other developers, especially on homeownership projects, including condos, as well as single family and townhomes. The city of Madison is, I know they are experimenting with doing their own development, which I think is great. I think we could see more of that. Helps save on overhead costs and financing costs, and allows for permanent ownership of land by the city itself. And similarly, I think focusing more on land banking, acquiring land near transit or areas that are getting redeveloped with the explicit goal of keeping them permanently affordable is a really important piece of this policy puzzle. And then as kind of alongside that, nonprofits can also acquire land near transit or in these areas at risk of redevelopment, appreciating prices. But it can be hard if you're using subsidy to make that happen quickly. And so I think there's a need for more flexible financing tools that nonprofits can use to acquire that naturally occurring affordable housing to keep it permanently affordable. And then I think kind of alongside all of this, I think there needs to be goals around permanent affordability. I've seen a really interesting goal in the city of Boulder's kind of reports where they have a goal that 15% of all housing in Boulder will be permanently affordable by 2035. City of Madison doesn't have anything like that. They say, we need to create 15,000 new homes by 2030, and at least a quarter will be long-term affordable. And by that, again, they mean 30 to 40 years. They don't have they have some incentives or carrots kind of around permanent affordability currently in the RFPs that have popped up over the last few years, but there's no kind of requirements or goals or strategic planning really around permanent affordability in the city of Madison that's explicit. Stop here.